Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 33 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline, and I'll also take a final look at my Game Week 33 team selection as well. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, given the fact that both Liverpool and Arsenal both double in Game Week 34, and they've both got decent doubles as well, no particularly difficult fixtures in there for either, and given they are two of the best teams in the league with some of the best FPL assets as well, for most people that aren't free hitting in 34, they're looking at loading up on 3 from Liverpool and 3 from Arsenal. So there are a lot of questions around the best 3 to own, and we will discuss that in this section. But interestingly, they also obviously both played in Europe. So Arsenal played on Tuesday against Bayern Munich. Pretty decent performance. I think probably slightly upset not to come away with more from that game, but I think they'll take the draw. Whereas Liverpool just lost, and I'm recording this directly after. I didn't watch the game, by the way, but they lost 3-0 to Atalanta. They did not put out their strongest 11. I don't know if it was a matter of almost like throwing the Europa League to focus on the Prem. Maybe that's giving Liverpool too much credit, and maybe it was just a bad performance. Let me know down below if you did watch it. But I thought I would discuss the amount of minutes that some of the key players got in those midweek games, and also just discuss the underlying data to work out, is it best to go for like 2 attackers from Liverpool, 1 defender? And specifically on Arsenal, I think a lot of people are struggling. Is it still double defence, or is there some sort of possibility that you could go for a Havertz or an Ødegaard alongside Saka and only go for the 1 Arsenal defender? So basically, let's start with the minutes. We're actually going to start with Arsenal because they played first. A lot of players got 90 minutes, but it's the kind of players you would expect, right? Raya, Saliba, Gabriel, White, Saka, Ødegaard, and Rice were all the players to get 90 minutes. These players will play every single week, though, so I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that these players are absolutely nailed. I was a little bit hesitant on White in recent weeks because I thought Tomiyasu might just get the odd game ahead of him, but it looks like White is basically as nailed as Saliba and Gabriel, so maybe I got his minutes slightly wrong, but I would be very shocked if any of them miss out in the foreseeable future, and I would be very shocked as well in double game at 34 if they miss out on either of those games. They might get an early sub, and I think Saka definitely will. Saka has had quite a few early subs in recent weeks, but if they are fit enough to start, I expect all of those to start. Havertz is obviously one that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. He got 86 minutes. I think it was actually Partey came on for Havertz to just shore up that midfield. I still think Havertz he's not quite as nailed as those set of players above him, but I think that Havertz would really need a rest, and that would be decided with the sports scientist and physiotherapist, by the way, not us over on Twitter. But I think the only reason that Havertz would get a rest if physiologically needs a rest. I don't think he's going to be rotated because I think he's too important to that Arsenal setup. I suppose the concern that you have on Havertz is that Jesus is a very, very good alternative, and he can play that role perfectly well. They are slightly different players in that Havertz is more physical, he's a lot taller. But in terms of that position that they play in the team, which is helping those around them, especially the likes of Martinelli, Saka on the wings, I think Jesus can play that role. So I would not be surprised. Actually, would I be? I wouldn't be massively surprised, I suppose, if Havertz in double game week 34 was to not start one of the 2 games. I still think he'd get minutes off the bench, but could he get like 90 minutes in the first game and then 30 minutes in the second? He absolutely could. But it might well be worth the risk because we discussed this in the Game Week preview video. Havertz data is much better than Ødegaard's. So I almost feel like despite the fact that Ødegaard is much more nailed, and despite the fact that Ødegaard is on penalties when Saka isn't on the pitch, it may still be worth the upside of Havertz. If we're talking about specifically Game Week 33, I would be very surprised if Saka, Ødegaard and Havertz don't start. So I think you're probably fine for Game Week 33, but obviously you're thinking about Game Week 34 as well, and I can't confirm right now to you that any of these players start both because you just never know. But I would still be pretty happy taking a punt on Havertz. So you get the thumbs up from me on the Havertz pick. I think it's very high upside, and if he does miss one game, you never know, you could get something off the bench. Lots of questions in previous weeks about Kivior, Zinchenko, left back. I just wouldn't go there. We saw that Kivior started. He's actually been very impressive for Arsenal this season when he's been called upon, but he struggled massively in that first half against Bayern Munich. So Kivior came off and Zinchenko came on. I have no idea who's going to start in Game Week 33, and I have no idea who's going to start in 34 either. And Tomiyasu's still not getting a whole lot of minutes. I don't think that's a tactical thing because Tomiyasu is absolutely excellent. So maybe he's just building his fitness back up. But I feel like when Ben White, Gabriel and Saliba look pretty much fully nailed on, you've then essentially got 3 very good players for one position, which is Kivior, Kivior Zinchenko and Tomiyasu. So for me, I just wouldn't go near the left backs. And then the likes of Jesus, Trossard, Martinelli, any of those can play on the left. So I probably wouldn't go for them either. So basically, for Arsenal, I think it's potentially one or two of their defenders, Rice, Saliba, Gabriel, White, look pretty good. I would say that probably if you're going for the most nailed on, it's probably Raya and Gabriel, but Saliba and White look to be getting good minutes. And then in the attack, I would say it's still Saka, Havertz, Ødegaard, but I love the three of them. Before we discuss whether it's better to go for double Arsenal defence or double Arsenal attack, let's just take a look at the minutes for Liverpool. Not a great performance, but some players did get 90. So Kelleher got 90. Didn't have the best of games, but I still feel like the issue we've got with whether Kelleher starts or not, I don't think it'll be based on his performance. I think it's whether Alisson is fit. And Alisson actually wasn't in the squad. It was Adrian that was in the squad. So if Alisson's still not fully available, I think there's a good chance you maybe get another game from Kelleher here. So maybe you just go for it. But you could also see if, with a goalkeeper, as long as they have gotten over their injury, they don't have to build up fitness in the same way as attackers. So Alisson not being in the squad isn't the same as like an attacker not being in the squad, if that makes sense. I still feel like Alisson could just come back into the 11. So let's see if we get any updates on whether Alisson is fully fit and ready. I think if he is available, I would not be surprised to see Alisson come back in. That will be hopefully something that we get some last minute information on. But Kelleher did play 90. Joe Gomez played 90. And the reason I think that's important is he could play 90 again, or he could start against Crystal Palace, but less likely given that some other players that can play those positions didn't get any minutes. Konate played 90 minutes, interestingly. Didn't get injured by the looks of it, which is good for him. But is he going to then get another start? Potentially not. And obviously, Quansah didn't get any minutes, so I would expect Quansah to come back in. Van Dijk got 90 minutes as well. And then at left back, both Robertson and Tsimikas got 45. Regarding the rest of the defenders, Trent didn't get any minutes, and Bradley didn't get any minutes. So there's a chance that both of them could potentially start, I suppose, against Crystal Palace. But for me, I don't see why you rest Bradley in this game, right? He's played a lot of minutes recently, fair enough. But if you've got Trent in a position where Trent is ready to start against Palace, then surely you just start Bradley against Atalanta ready for Trent to start against Palace. What are you saving Bradley for here by benching him? So whilst Trent's obviously back in the squad, which is a little bit worrying as a Bradley owner, I'm looking at this and thinking, the fact that Bradley got 0 minutes, surely he is being kept to start for that Crystal Palace game. So this actually makes me relatively confident of a Bradley start. I could be massively wrong, by the way. So my prediction for a back four for Liverpool, this bit of a rambly section, I do apologise, but hopefully you're enjoying it. My prediction for the back four for Liverpool would be Bradley at right back, Quansah and Van Dijk at centre back, and then probably Robertson at left back. But it could be Gomez or Tsimikas, and I think it still will be Kelleher in goal. So that's my prediction. Could be massively wrong. When we look at the rest of the team, McAllister got 90, but he's an absolute unit. The man can just run for days, so wouldn't worry about McAllister. Szoboszlai got a bit of a rest, 45, so I expect both McAllister, Szoboszlai to start, and I would expect Endo to start as well midfield, so I think their midfield three will be their best midfield three. Then for the front three, I think two of them are fairly nailed on. So Diaz actually didn't start the game, and Darwin did. So Darwin got 60, and then Diaz came on for Darwin. Salah actually came on at half-time, I think it was for Elliott, so Salah only got 45. Gakpo got 90 minutes, so he played the full 90. And then Jota did get minutes off the bench. Jota got 14 minutes. So I'm looking at this and thinking, Gakpo playing 90, not being favoured in the Prem. Gakpo's not starting. I can't see a world in which he does. And he didn't have a great performance here. Salah and Diaz being rested from the start tells me that they're being saved for the Prem. So I'd be very surprised if Salah and Luis Diaz don't start. Then that final spot is for me between Darwin and Jota here. The fact that Jota only got 14 minutes, I don't think Jota's quite ready for a start. So I would be, again, very surprised if the front three isn't Darwin, Diaz, and Salah. But I certainly think at the moment that Diaz is slightly more nailed on than Darwin in the Premier League because he's been putting in better performances. Darwin missed yet another big chance in the Europa League. So maybe Klopp might be a bit angry and want to play Jota. I don't think that's the case. I think he loves Darwin. But I would expect it to essentially be their strongest 11. I expect to start from Bradley. I expect to start from Quansah. I think Robertson will get the nod as well. And assuming that Alisson isn't quite ready, I think Kelleher will probably start. But for double game week 34, Jota's now going to be back and available, assuming he doesn't re-aggravate his injury. Alisson will be back and Trent will be back. So all of a sudden, yes, for 33, we might think we have a good idea of who's going to play. But for 34, I don't think it's going to be that straightforward. So with all of that rambling being said, I think 33 is a lot easier to predict. But let's say you need a player for 33 and 34. What is the ideal triple up for Liverpool and Arsenal? Do you go for 2 Arsenal defenders, like I said? Do you completely skip all of the defenders and maybe just load up on the attackers? What you can see in this table at the bottom is non-penalty expected goals for Arsenal and Liverpool per 90 across the season and across the last 6, which is the first 2 columns. Then you've got non-penalty expected goals conceded ranking, which is the defensive ranking per 90 across the season and across the last 6. It's actually very, very interesting, right? It almost paints this perfect pattern. Across the season and the last 6, Arsenal are the best defence. Across the season and across the last 6, Liverpool are the best attack. Then when we look at the alternative, Arsenal's still a pretty good attack, right? Across the season, they're the 3rd best attack in the league for non-penalty expected goals. And across the last 6, they've dropped off slightly, but they're still 6th. So it doesn't mean that Arsenal attack is bad. Their defence is just very strong. And it's almost the exact same for Liverpool. Liverpool's defence has actually been 3rd across the season and 3rd across the last 6. So they are, by all accounts, a very strong defence. Although it didn't look like that against Atalanta. Sorry, I'm trying to not get my digs in against Liverpool. So they've still been defending fairly well this season. So what this essentially says is you probably can't go very wrong with defenders or attackers from Liverpool and Arsenal. You'll probably be fine with either. But if you are backing the stats, this would suggest probably a double up on the Arsenal defence with 1 attacker from Arsenal, and then a double up on the Liverpool attack with 1 defender from Liverpool. So if you are following the stats and following the very template thing, it's probably Van Dijk, Gabriel, and then 1 of Saliba, White, Raya. Let's say Ben White for some fun. So it's probably Van Dijk, Gabriel, White, and then in the attack, it's probably, I would say now, Diaz rather than Darwin, Salah, and Saka. They're probably your best 6 players that you can own. But is there a potential here to just go, do you know what? I'm just going to randomly back that Villa and maybe one of Wolves and Chelsea score against this Arsenal defence. Let's say they only get 1 clean sheet in the next 3. Well, then they're probably going to get, without bonus, 6 + 2 + 2, right? So they're going to get you 10 points, the Arsenal defenders. Probably as a minimum. Could Havertz get more than 10 points in the next 3? He absolutely could. So just because the Arsenal defence is fantastic doesn't mean you can't back against that with 1 Arsenal defender and 2 Arsenal attackers. And I think especially this is the case if you're on free hit 34, and we'll discuss this more next week. I'm looking at this and thinking, I've already got Raya, and in the free hit, I'd probably have 1 Arsenal defender. Could I go for a Saka and a Havertz, or a Saka and an Ødegaard? Or if you want to go really different, an Ødegaard and a Havertz? Or if you want to go even more different, could you go for Saka, Ødegaard and Havertz? You absolutely could. But you can't sit there then and complain if Arsenal keep 2 out of the next 3 as clean sheets, or even 3 clean sheets in a row. Because the data is showing that Arsenal are a silly defence. I mean, they are just brilliant. So if you're going to back against the data, you have to be willing to accept that if Arsenal keep clean sheets, it's going to hurt your rank, and it's probably what makes sense. On Liverpool, I don't think it makes much sense to go for 2 defenders because I just don't think there are. Other than maybe Alisson, if he's fit by then, Van Dijk's the only one that's nailed on to get 2 starts. I don't see anyone else here. Trent, Bradley, Quansah, Konate, Tsimikas, Robertson. I don't know who's going to get 2 starts in the Liverpool double. And also, you'd need them to start 33. So for me, it's just Van Dijk. And like I said, I just think I prefer Diaz to Darwin slightly at the moment based on minutes and performances. But just a little shout out, by the way, to McAllister, because he's so nailed on. If Salah does come off early for whatever reason, McAllister will be on pens. He's on some set pieces, and he is playing a more advanced role now that Endo is fit and in the starting 11. So there we go. That was a very long and rambly section on Liverpool and Arsenal, but I feel like a lot of people are making some key decisions about them. If I've not answered your question on Liverpool and Arsenal, drop it down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. So interestingly, there are lots of questions flying around about 1 week punts this week, and this will be especially useful if you are looking for 1 week punts, but even if you're not, probably still watch this section because I'm talking about players that I think have pretty decent upside for this week. This list is not exhaustive, but I thought rather than discussing like 50 players, I would just give you my top 3 punts in each of the positions. There are currently 12 players on your screen. Quick maths with FPL Raptor. And these are the players that I will be looking at taking 1 week punts. I suppose the people that are looking on 1 week punts are either wildcarding in 35 and have just got free transfers to use because they've got 2 this week and their team already looks good for 34, which I've seen a lot of people with. Great, by the way. It means you plan probably quite well. But there are also people that are free hit 34, wildcard 35, in which literally they only have 1 week with this team. So for those looking for a 1 week punt, I'll very briefly just go through defenders and goalkeepers. The upside just isn't there though with them, right? You could get a 15 pointer from a defender. With a goalkeeper, you're looking at a maximum of 8 points probably. Sometimes you might stretch to 10 or 11. But I would only make a goalkeeper transfer if you have no playing goalkeeper. And I would only make a defender transfer if your defence is really stinky. Other than that, I would much rather go for the midfielders and forwards because they can get you 15, 20 points. Whereas with defenders and goalkeepers, unless you absolutely nail it, I think that's very unlikely. So 4 goalkeepers. I've picked 3 goalkeepers with home fixtures and pretty decent home fixtures. Flecken against Sheffield United feels like arguably the best fixture. That's why you can see so many Brentford players here. I think Raya against Villa is not a great fixture on paper, but it is at home, and we've spoken about how good the Arsenal defence is. I still feel like if you've not got any Arsenal cover, you've only got one. A 1 week punt on Raya is probably a 6-pointer maximum, but it is probably as likely as you are going to get for a clean sheet, given how good Arsenal are. And then Ederson, a little bit hesitant on this one because Ortega could start again. But if we get some sort of leak that Ederson starts, again, as with Raya, it's probably a 6-point max, but it is a good chance for a clean sheet. With the defence, I'm looking at 3 very similar teams here. I've actually added in a Brighton defender, but Reguilon would be first choice. He's on set pieces. He's got really good open play creative threat as well. And again, it's a good fixture for a clean sheet. So Reguilon would absolutely be my favoured defender to bring in for a 1 week punt. I've put Dunk in here. This could be Van Heck if you want, although he's not got much attacking threat. Estepinian. If we think Estepinian will start, and I know he's a bit of a troll, maybe he could be a decent 1 week punt because not many people will go there. And then I've got Akanji. I will just say, when I'm thinking about punts, I'm trying to think about fairly lowly owned players. So like when we get onto the attackers, like Phil Foden, Saka, they're great. They're not really punts, right? So with the defenders, these are all fairly lowly owned. I've gone for Akanji. I think Akanji and Diaz and maybe Gvardiol are probably the 3 most likely to start, dependent upon Walker's fitness. Stones, I would be very, very hesitant on. And outside, Rico Lewis could be a really decent shout. Maybe I should have put Lewis in here, but you just never know with Lewis because he's obviously not in Pep's favoured 11. So Akanji, Lewis, Diaz, one of the City defenders could be a really nice punt. I would say that Akanji's probably got the most goal threat. He seems to be pretty decent from corners, but maybe Lewis has got the most like open play assist threat. But I would be tempted by a City defender. But when we really start to get onto those high upside picks for 1 week, I think we're starting to look at midfielders and forwards. Top of my midfielder list is Doku. I mean, Doku's got to start this, right? And I'm hesitant when I say that, obviously, because Pep sometimes just has players that are slightly out of favour. But Doku's not going to be starting in the Champions League against Real Madrid. Grealish will be, and Grealish has played quite a few minutes since coming back from injury. Foden will be, and there are doubts around whether Foden starts. Haaland will be playing again against Real Madrid. Is he going to start? Probably, but will he get subbed off early? Probably again. Oscar Bob could obviously play here. You could take a punt on Bob if you wanted to. Bernardo Silva might get a bit of a rest here. There's rumours about Rodri getting a rest. I actually don't think it's going to be an overly strong starting lineup for City. But you can see in my midfield and forward spot, I've got Doku and Alvarez because I think these two should start because they won't start against Real Madrid. I could be massively off with this. I've been done in the past trying to predict Pep. But if I was to predict now, Doku and Alvarez, I would predict them to start. And therefore, despite how strong we think this City lineup might be, Doku and Alvarez have to be up there for me. I also think De Bruyne deserves a shout whilst we're talking about Manchester City because obviously he was ill against Real Madrid. If he's over that illness now, maybe he gets 60 to 70 minutes just to get him in a position where he's still fit and in rhythm ahead of Real Madrid. But I don't expect De Bruyne to get 90 regardless. So I think I would be willing to take a punt on Doku or Alvarez. And that's why for me, they're ahead of the Brentford assets because I like the Brentford assets defensively for the potential upside of saves and attacking threat. But in the attack, you're expecting Man City to score more goals this week. So I really like Doku and Alvarez if you can get there. But then the other two would be Mbeumo and Tony. I don't know whether Tony's going to start, by the way. There were a few questions around there. If Tony's a doubt, I think this means 2 things. If Tony's a doubt, it makes Mbeumo even better because what we've then got is Mbeumo back on pens. But it also opens up Wissa as a serious option because it will be Wissa and Mbeumo up top for Brentford. So I think Tony being out only strengthens Mbeumo and it opens the door to Wissa. I think Tony will start, though, assuming that he has the ability to do so. Some people suggesting it's because Tony's out in the summer and they're slowly easing him out of the squad. I don't buy that. I think Tony genuinely was struggling. I think it was with his hip, Thomas Frank said. So if there are doubts around Tony, just don't take the risk. But it might make Mbeumo, like I said, a seriously good option. And then if you don't want to go for the Man City or the Brentford assets, I've just gone for 2 further little punts here. So Havertz, maybe an Ødegaard, any of the Arsenal attack, really. Villa aren't defending overly well, although they did tonight in Europe. But in general, they're conceding quite a few chances. And Arsenal are attacking okay at the moment. And Havertz is, I would predict, going to be starting as the number 9 once again. So I know a lot of people look to bring in Havertz in 34. But I also think Havertz, just for this week alone, is really, really nice as well. And then Joao Pedro. Now, I'll discuss Joao Pedro in the final 2 sections, because I might be bringing Joao Pedro in all of a sudden out of nowhere. And by the way, big shout out to FPL Pickle, my girlfriend. She was the first one to consider Joao Pedro. And it looks like she's copying me, but I'm actually copying her. But Joao Pedro is genuinely a seriously good option, I think. I don't think he'll start every game, but that doesn't matter here because you're only going to have him for the 1 week. And what De Zerbi basically come out in the his press conference or his interview and said is that Joao Pedro was meant to start against Arsenal, but he unfortunately played him for too many minutes against Brentford because no one else could come on for him. So I think he was planning on playing Joao Pedro for like 70 minutes. He had to play Joao Pedro for 90 against Brentford, which then made him feel like he couldn't start him against Arsenal. That does mean that Joao Pedro's not fully fit. But what that also means, if you read between the lines of that interview, is Joao Pedro is definitely first choice at the moment. So I'm expecting a Joao Pedro start against Burnley, and a 1 week punt on a striker against Burnley on penalties could be really, really nice. And I expect his ownership to be quite low. So there we go. Those are 1 week punts that I would consider. If you are looking for 1 week punts, let me know if I've missed anyone down below and who you are considering just for this 1 week. So guys, there were a lot of questions flying in around bench boost, and I think this is for a couple of reasons. Some people looking at their teams right now that are wildcarding in 35 and thinking, I could actually, with my 2 or 3 free transfers, build towards a very good bench boost for 34. And that would allow me to then wildcard without the need for a strong bench ahead of 37. And I do really, really like that. We'll discuss that in a second. Also, I've put out a couple of tweets and discussed in my videos that I'm actually tempted by bench boost 35, despite it not being a double game week for the players on my bench. Obviously, it is for Spurs and Chelsea, despite my bench being single game week players, because I'm being almost forced to play my Spurs and Chelsea assets in 35. My bench actually has some players with really strong fixtures. Like, is it worth building towards 37? Like, is 37 that great, or should we maybe look to play it a little bit earlier? So I can't look at every single bench and give you advice. So what I thought I'd do is have a bit of a chat around what I'm thinking about with the bench boost, what I think a good bench boost is, and then just give you my example, right? Because it's very narcissistic, but hopefully me talking through my example does help you a little bit. So the first thing, benches are unpredictable, and you probably don't need me to tell you this if you've been playing FPL for a while, but there are just because there's going to be sometimes you look at your bench and you're like, that is an awful bench, and then by the end of the game week, it sat there with like 35 points. I once in one season had 42 points on my bench. I had 2 defenders that scored and kept clean sheets. One of my goalkeepers made like 9 saves, and then the attacker got like a goal. It was just genuinely, I was like, it almost outscored my entire 11, right? So benches can just do that. So the first thing to know is if someone's like, well, no, it's a bad week to bench, you just never know, right? So play it in a week that feels good for you. But there are a few things that I would think about. Firstly, can you guarantee 15 starts? And you can never fully guarantee. But what I mean by that, right, is if 1 or 2 of your players in your starting 11 are real doubts for that week, don't play the bench boost. Because if both of them miss out, you would get 2 players from your bench anyway, right? So you need to be sure that, as sure as you can be, that none of the players coming on from your bench would actually come onto the pitch. Now, the reason that I note this is because in a big double game week like game week 37, all of my players in my starting 11 are doublers at the moment if I was to bench boost in 37, right? Not all of the players on my bench are, but all of the players in my starting 11 are. Therefore, if they miss the first game due to illness or just due to surprise rotation, I'd probably still get them in the second game. And therefore, I feel like, in big double game weeks, bench boost makes a lot more sense because you're likely to at least get 1 start from your players in your starting 11. The next thing to know is there some upside? And what I mean by that is, do you have an attacker that has a good fixture and the potential to go big? Do you have a defender that either has really decent attacking threat, i.e. they could go out and get you a goal or an assist, or they have a really good chance for a clean sheet? And does your goalkeeper have a fixture that has good chance for clean sheet, but also some save points too? You don't want to bench boost a bench where it's like, I know, as I said, anything could happen, but you don't want to bench boost a bench where it's like, I've got an attacker with really bad data and not a great fixture. I've got a defender that's got a poor fixture. My goalkeeper's not got a great... You don't want to look at it and think, even in an ideal world, I don't think I'm getting more than 20 points here. So upside is very, very important. And then the other thing, which sounds fairly obvious, is when are you using your other chips? Because if you've still got the free hit, wildcard, triple captain, and bench boost, in isolation, bench boost 37 might be perfect for your team. But if you'd prefer to play the free hit there and you could maybe build a bench boost in 34, that makes more sense. Maybe you are absolutely certain that triple captain salary in 34 is the best week. Then obviously don't play your bench boost there. And also, wildcard. Would you rather wildcard out of 34 with a stronger 11 and a weaker bench and maybe allow you to hold Arsenal assets? Or would you rather potentially wildcard into a bench boost so that you can make sure that your bench boost is as strong as possible? So these, I mean, I'm just asking questions. I'm not really answering them for you, but these are the things you need to think about. Before we look at sort of average good bench boosts and also bench boost 35, 37, very briefly on bench boost 34, I actually love bench boost 34. I think if your team is in a position now where with your 2 or 3 transfers, you can build a pretty strong bench for 34, even if it includes Cole Palmer, by the way, because I think he could do some damage against Arsenal. And even if not, you should still have 2 or 3 other really good options on your bench. If you can build to a bench boost 34 and you are very happy with it, I would be tempted. And the reason I say that is not only can you then wildcard in 35, right, with a much stronger 11 and a much weaker bench, but you can also hold Arsenal assets, because those people that are wildcard in 35 to bench boost 37, they can't have, well, they could to have 2 or 3 Arsenal assets, but then you're bench boosting 2 or 3 Arsenal assets against Man United away in 37. So I quite like the idea of getting your bench boost out the way, wildcarding in 35, because it allows you to hold on to Arsenal, but also Liverpool assets potentially as well. Anyway, so for me, a poor bench boost would be anything sort of 11 points and under, maybe even 12 points and under. I'm not saying 11 or 12, I wouldn't be like, that is a disaster. But anything under 11 or 12, I'm looking at and thinking, a bit of a waste of a chip. That wasn't a great use of it. Average bench boost, I think you're looking at 12 to 16 points. And the reason 16 is noted here, if you have 4 players that are doubling, in an ideal world, in a big double, you'd get 4 players doubling. You can see in 37, I've not quite got that. But if all 4 players double, all 4 players play, and all 4 players play enough minutes to get appearance points in both games, they will get you 4 points apiece, which if you add that up means 16. So just through appearance points alone, assuming none of them get you negative, 16 is where you're aiming. So I feel like that is average. 12 to 16 means you've just probably got appearance points, and that's it. Therefore, if you get anything above that, you're getting all of the appearance points and an attacking return or a defensive return, like a clean sheet. So I would say 17 to 24 is probably a good bench boost, and then 25 plus is great. 30 plus, which I've had on 2 occasions in the last 4 years, that's like an exceptional bench boost. One of them, I think Ben Foster got like a 15-pointer. He had a double game week. I think he might have saved a pen or just got loads of saves, but they don't happen too often. If you're coming away with a 20 to 25 point bench boost, you're like, you know what? I'm happy with that, honestly. Anything in the 20s is pretty good. The reason I say that is you can get like projected points, and you can get a bit of an idea. By the way, projected points can't predict the future. So people are like, oh my God, the projected points were wrong. Obviously they're wrong, right? Because they can't predict the future. If predicted points predicted the future every time, then we wouldn't bother playing FPL. And obviously someone can't score like 4.3 points, but it gives you a bit of an idea about what your bench is expected to do. So what I've done is I have built, using my transfers, if I was to focus on a bench boost 35, what is the sort of best bench I could build with my free transfers? This is without taking any hits. And then assuming that everything goes to plan, what is the best bench boost 37 that I can build? So as you can see, for 35, if I make the transfers the way that I could for a bench boost 35, I could have Onana against Burnley at home, Burn against Sheffield United at home, Højlund against Burnley at home, and Van Hecke against Bournemouth away. So Van Hecke is a weak point here, but it's not an awful fixture. I get double Man United against Burnley at home, and then Burn against Sheffield United at home. 3 of those fixtures are perfection, right, for Onana, Burn, and Højlund. And so whilst there aren't any doubles, they are really good single game week fixtures. And when I look at my starting 11, as I said before, I'm pretty sure all 11 of my starting 11 will start, unless there are any real surprises. However, according to Fantasy Football Hub, that is projected to get me 15.2 points that week. If I build towards 37, I would have still Onana and still Van Hecke and still Burn. Right? So 3 of the players are the same, but all 3 of them would have a double in this week. Onana against Arsenal at home and Newcastle at home, Van Hecke against Newcastle and Chelsea, and Burn against Brighton and Man United. I don't see clean sheets in any of those games. This is the issue, right? So they would get me 4 points apiece, which adds up to 12, which is the equivalent of 2 clean sheets, by the way, if they play and don't get any minus points. But I'm not expecting clean sheets, and I am expecting minus points. I absolutely expect in some of these games. I expect Arsenal to put 2 past Man United. I expect Van Hecke to concede 2 against Newcastle, and maybe even 2 against Chelsea. So whilst they are doubles, they're not particularly good doubles. And this is the issue that we've got. You are probably going to be bench boosting in 37 with 3 defenders with really bad fixtures. I mean, they're not awful, I suppose, but they're certainly not great. I suppose the addition here, which is really nice, is I'd have Salah rather than Højlund. And while Salah's fixture is more difficult than Højlund's, I'd always rather bench boost with a Salah. This bench, according to Fantasy Football Hub, is projected to get me 26.6 points. Right? We're looking at over 11 points more. And so when I look at it, it's like, even though there aren't as many clean sheet points, just through appearance points, save points for Onana in 2 different games, and having a better asset such as Salah, in isolation, 37 probably is better than 35. But here's something to think about. If I bench boosted in 35, it'd be a lot easier for me to hold my Arsenal assets, because I could start them in 35 if I wanted to, and then carry them through. The other thing to think about is 37 is a couple of game weeks later. Right, you've got to get through 35 and 36. Let's say I pick up 2 or 3 injuries in 35 and 36 ahead of 37. All of a sudden, not only am I probably going to have a weaker bench, I'm going to have to take hits to get to a decent bench. It's about playing what's in front of you, right? Your bench in 34, you might be like, oh, it's not great, but you might not have any injured players, you might say, do you know what? I'm going to decide not to play it in 34. Instead, wildcard 35 and bench boost 37. It's a great strategy. But let's say you get really unlucky on your wildcard 35 and pick up a few injuries. That bench boost isn't looking as great. So there is something to be said about just playing what's in front of you. So I'll leave it there because there was a lot of chat about bench boost there. I am very tempted by 35, but I am leaning more and more towards just going, do you know what? I'm going to back that I can deal with injuries with free transfers, hope that there aren't too many, and just play my bench boost in the biggest double game week because I'm most likely to not actually need my bench to come onto my team. I'm going to get more fixtures and I will be able to put someone like a Salah or a Saka on my bench, which I think does make it stronger in general. I'd love to know down below, when are you planning on playing your bench boost? Sorry if you can hear shouting outside, by the way. I live in the middle of Nottingham city centre and it's apparently a big night on Thursday at 11:15 p.m. So on the next section, I wanted to discuss captaincy. In previous videos, I've done like big captaincy tables. I'm not doing that this week for one reason. If Haaland starts, I think Haaland is comfortably the standout option. Now, that isn't me saying that you can't go against him. You absolutely could, and it probably will pay off for some people. Haaland is very rarely the top scoring player in a game week, especially recently. So there is a good chance that one of your players in your 11 maybe outscores Haaland. But I don't think logically on paper it makes much sense this week if we expect a Haaland start. So my simple answer to this is if Haaland starts, he will be my captain. If I think he starts, he will be my captain. But if you don't think he starts, then no, he shouldn't be your captain, obviously. So I think for me here, and I quite like this to be honest, because I think this requires a little bit of skill and understanding, it comes down to your expected minutes prediction. How many minutes do you think Haaland gets? If you think he gets 65 plus, I still think he's the best captaincy option. If you think he gets less than that, let's say comes off at half time, or you think he doesn't start the game, then absolutely go elsewhere. There were a few people that said they either were working during the deadline or they're in a different time zone. And if you can't wait for leaks, because obviously my advice would be, despite me not loving this part of the game, if you have access to my deadline stream on Saturday, just watch my deadline stream because I will probably get information, whether it be publicly or via DM. I think we'll get some information around whether Haaland starts because City play at 3 p.m. So they're not the early kickoff, but I think they're close enough to get some information. So I think we'll get that news. But if you are in a position where you're not, I absolutely think it is worth at least considering captaining one of the other players. Now, as to who you captain if you don't go for Haaland, Salah is always the obvious backup option, just given how good his underlying data is and given how reliable he is on penalties. The fact he only played 45 minutes against Atalanta, I would expect probably 90 minutes now against Crystal Palace. It's at Anfield, and we know that Salah is ridiculously good at Anfield. I kind of fancy Salah to go fairly big, and I don't think that there will be much between Haaland and Salah, even if Haaland does start. But as I said, I do think there's enough for me where if I think Haaland starts, I'll still go there. But let's put it this way instead. Let's say that we know for a fact, which we don't, Haaland gets 65 and Salah gets 90. Is 90 minutes of Salah against Palace better than 65 of Haaland against Luton? I think I would still just about back Luton, given that Crystal Palace aren't a bad defence. Sorry, I'd back Haaland, but that's close. The issue is we don't know. Haaland could just get 90. Like, does Haaland need a rest? He's recently had a rest. There are obviously people joking around that Haaland had a rest against Real Madrid. He still ran, right? It was still a bit of a physical battle with Rudiger. So I don't think he got a rest there by any means. But I don't feel like there's been a massive physical load on Haaland recently. So he might even get 90 minutes. So I just feel like it's probably not worth betting against him. But as I said, Salah could genuinely outscore him this week. So if you are not around at the deadline, putting the armband on Mohamed Salah at home in a game that Liverpool need to win and they want to rebound after that 3-0 loss against Atalanta, you could do far, far worse. The only other one that I really want to give a serious shout out to is Heung-min Son. I love this Newcastle game for him. Newcastle are still bad defensively. Despite the clean sheet recently, they're not a good defence. And this game just suits Sonny to an absolute T. On penalties, probably playing as the number 9 again, against a defence that will push up the pitch and leave space in behind. I mean, it is perfect for Heung-min Son. So I genuinely do think you don't just automatically captain Salah. At least give some serious consideration to Son. Saka, Foden, and even to some extent De Bruyne, there's just too many doubts around their minutes. And unless you get confirmation they start, I would be a little bit hesitant to go there on those three. Cole Palmer always deserves consideration. I just think that Everton have been good enough defensively this season, and Chelsea are quite unreliable that I wouldn't want to go there. So to put that into perspective, basically, Haaland is still the number 1 for me, unless you really don't think he starts, or unless you just don't want to risk it and you're not available at the deadline. Then it probably still would be Salah, but I think very close in third is Son, and I predict that Son will get at least one attacking return this game week. I'd love to know down below, based on the information that we currently have, without knowing if Haaland's going to start or not, who are you captaining for game week 33? So very, very quickly, just answering some of your other questions, pretty quick fire here, and then I'll get onto my team at the end of the video as well to show you what I'm currently planning. The first two questions around best third striker in order, with the idea of free hit 34, bench boost 37, and then there was also a question around Joao Pedro. I'll discuss him in that because I think he is an option for third striker, and I myself am looking at him. I think this would be, I guess, with in mind that Isak and Haaland are the best two, and I would back that. So if you don't have Isak, I would have him in, and I still think Haaland is worth having, despite him being slightly disappointing in recent weeks. So for me, Haaland and Isak, fairly locked. I think you've got a few options for this third spot. You move it around, i.e. you just use this spot in your team, if you've got the free transfers, to just shift it around based on the week. So maybe you do bring in Joao Pedro for this week, and then in 35, you maybe look to move to Cunha, and then maybe you move on from that. That's a potential option. But if you don't want to do that, which most people probably don't because they don't have the free transfers, I think it's Joao Pedro as an option. I think Højlund is an option. I still don't mind Cunha, assuming that he gets a start soon, because in the weeks that you need him, I actually really, really like the fixtures. Nico Jackson deserves a shout as well. I think he could be a decent option, assuming that he doesn't pick up that 10th yellow card and assuming you haven't already tripled up on Chelsea. But for me, it probably is Højlund and Joao Pedro, because they're the only two there that double in 37, other than Jackson, who obviously is a yellow card risk, I suppose. So Joao Pedro and Højlund for me are the two that I'm considering. The reason that Joao Pedro has suddenly entered my thinking, very cheap, which offers options, for example, in 35. If I go for Joao Pedro now, you could bring in someone like a Trippier in 35 or 36. You then open up the opportunity, I should say, to bring in someone like De Bruyne in 37. It just frees up so much funds to do something like Darwin to Joao Pedro. So very, very cheap. And also, I really like those quotes that came out from De Zerbi around Joao Pedro that basically makes it sound like he wants to start Joao Pedro whenever he can. He's just obviously building his fitness back up. He's on penalties. The underlying data is good. There are lots of reasons to love Joao Pedro as an option. The reason to not love him is no, he is not nailed, and no, he will not start every game for the remainder of the season. I think out of the remaining games for Brighton, he'll miss 2 or 3, i.e. he will not start 2 or 3. So if you're looking for a player to play every week, Joao Pedro is not that man. And the fixtures aren't perfect, by the way, for Brighton either. But what I would say, the weeks that I think that you need Joao Pedro, which is 33 this week, I think he'll start against Burnley. And then the other week that you really need him is 37. You don't really need him in 35 or 36 if you've got a team similar to me. You can play someone like Garnacho or Gordon ahead of him. And in 37, by then, if he's played enough minutes and built up his fitness, there is a chance he plays both. And even if he doesn't play both, you get one start and then 20, 30 minutes off the bench for Joao Pedro on pens with really good underlying data. It's not that bad for his price. So you could definitely do worse than Joao Pedro, but don't bring him in thinking that he's going to start every game, in my opinion. Next question is on Brennan Johnson. Is he being overlooked? Absolutely, I do think so, but I also don't think he starts every game. The reason that Brennan Johnson has been so very nailed is Richarlison has not been available. Yes, they've got Kulusevski they could play on the right and Werner on the left, but they have been favouring Brennan Johnson in that starting 11. He started most of the games recently and got good minutes for Spurs. But when Richarlison is back fully fit, which we expect to be very, very soon, I just can't confirm to you that Brennan Johnson continues to start every game. So is he a potential option at a very cheap price? Yes. But are you going to get a start from him every time? No. So he's in a very similar position to Joao Pedro. If you're bringing him in knowing that he won't start every game, could get some minutes off the bench when he doesn't, then by all means go for it. But I still value Maddison and Son ahead of him. Son would obviously be top of my list. And if Richarlison starts to get back into that starting 11, I probably prefer him to Johnson, Maddison, Kulis, anyone pretty much. There are some shouts around Werner as well, but I just wouldn't go there for the same kind of reason. So for me, Brennan Johnson is probably being slightly overlooked, but he's not like an excellent option that I really desperately want to bring into my team. Linking to Spurs, who would be the top 3 assets from Spurs and Chelsea? I want to get through this quickly, so I'm just going to list them. For me, it would be Son, Porro, and then one of you, Doggy, Maddison, or Richarlison, dependent upon predicted minutes. I'm not a massive fan of Petrovic, doesn't make enough saves, wouldn't go for any of the other attackers. On Chelsea, I still feel like it's Gusto and Palmer. I would probably go for Jackson ahead of Petrovic or any of the other attackers that you could go for. For me, it would be Gusto, Palmer, and Jackson. But don't feel like you have to triple up on both the teams, given that the fixtures aren't perfect and they don't necessarily have the best assets in the world, especially when we're looking at Chelsea. So for me, I would probably still have 5. I think I'd be looking at something like, as a minimum, Gusto, Palmer, Son, Porro, and then feel free to add a 5th and a 6th. If you are on free hit 34 on bench boost 37, is selling Arsenal assets a bad idea? It's not an awful idea, but I am leaning more and more towards now, and you'll see this when we look at my team, just keeping the Arsenal assets, because people that wildcard in 35, I would say 95% of them, and it may not be you, but 95% will have 0 Arsenal assets, because they're building towards that bench boost in 37, and you don't probably want to have, despite Man United not being a bad fixture in 37, you don't want single game weekers, and you don't want single game weekers, especially from a defensive perspective, against a team that can score goals. So I think it could be a really nice differential against those wildcarders in 35 to potentially just hang on to one or two Arsenal assets. So it's not a bad idea selling them. I definitely think you can get points out of other players, maybe even more points. But also, it's not a bad idea to keep them either. So at the moment, I'm almost tempted to hold on to Raya and Saka until game week 37. Which means I would get Saka for 35 and 36, where other people wouldn't have him. And I would get to start Raya against Bournemouth at home in 36. So again, not a bad idea, but also on the flip side, I don't think it's a terrible idea to keep them either. The final question is, who do I prefer out of Gordon and Garnacho? This one's fairly straightforward. If price was no issue, Gordon is a better asset for me. The data supports that. I just think he's a better FPL option. But when you are looking at recent performances, Garnacho's been very impressive, and he is also quite a bit cheaper still. So if we take into account everything, maybe Garnacho just edges ahead. Unless you are sat there with loads of team value, you've looked at future moves, you don't need to use that money, then I'd go for Gordon. The thing on Gordon is I think there are more good assets outside of Gordon from Newcastle than there are with United. Outside of Garnacho, who do you want? Maybe an Onana, maybe a Højlund, maybe a Dalot. Do you want all of those? Not really. Whereas with Newcastle, outside of Gordon, if Pope does have a setback, Dubravka's good. You've got Trippier when he's back, Fabian Schär, Dan Burn, Isak could be a really good option as well for most people. So I think there are just more options outside of Gordon that you could triple up on Newcastle. So for me, in isolation, Gordon's a better pick than Garnacho. But when you put everything together, maybe Garnacho does sneak ahead. So those are some other questions asked and hopefully answered. Let's now move on to, very briefly, what I'm now planning with my team because I have updated my transfer plans. So guys, this is the way that my team is currently set up ahead of Game Week 33. And I've got lots of possible ways that I can go with this, but I've got 2 free transfers and 1 million in the bank. So I need to use both of those free transfers because I'm on free hit 34. So I don't want to burn a transfer. So 2 transfers will be made. I need to balance. Obviously, I want my team to be good for this week, but I also need to start setting up towards 35 onwards and also bench boost 37 is currently the plan, just about ahead of 35. My plan a few days ago was to sell Raya and Bradley for Onana and Dan Burn because I obviously don't particularly want to own Arsenal and Liverpool assets for 37. And whilst they're okay for this week, there were some doubts around Bradley's minutes. And I think Raya is probably 6 points maximum in most weeks because he doesn't make many saves. However, I've now completely changed that plan. I think Bradley now starts against Crystal Palace. I'm not confident of a start, but I do feel like it is quite likely based on what I've seen. And I kind of like the idea, as we'll move on to in a second when we look at my team for future weeks, of just holding Raya until 37 now, because I think it's a nice differential to hold on to an Arsenal defender. And it doesn't really make much sense for me to sell a defender from the best defence in the league. So now I'm looking at it, and I don't want to sell Raya or Bradley this week. I also am a bit hesitant around selling Saka for Foden. Saka to Foden is a move I could make. And if we get a leak that Foden starts, maybe it's a move I might make. But I also think Saka against Villa at home is nice. And again, I quite like the idea of holding Saka longer term as well, because most people will look to sell him to bring in the likes of Foden. So I'm maybe backing against what will be popular at the time by actually holding on to him. What that therefore leaves me with is, hang on a second, all of the planned moves that I had, I can't really make. So I'm now looking at 8 Nuri on my bench, and I do love him as an option, I really do. But if there are doubts around him starting this week, and I think Bradley starts anyway, and I've got Van Heck and Gusto, I don't need 8 Nuri this week. In 35, if I can bring in Dan Burn, I know 8 Nuri's got Luton at home, but Dan Burn's got Sheffield United at home. And then I can start Gusto and Udogie for their doubles. So I don't need 8 Nuri in 35 anymore. So therefore, is 8 Nuri really serving me well long term? Not overly. So I could move him on this week. And then the other player, and you're not going to believe this, that I'm looking at potentially selling, is Darwin. Because again, Darwin's a player that longer term I don't really want to own. He didn't look fantastic in the Europa League, and he just doesn't haul, right? If we click on his points, look at them. And I know I shouldn't use past points as a predictor for future points, but he just doesn't, he doesn't finish enough chances to get that monster haul. And I'm sure the week I sell him, he will do it. But he just gets you an assist and a goal. So if he gets me 5 or 6 and the player that I bring in doesn't go massive, then fair enough, I've lost points. But I'm looking at moving him out, freeing up some funds by doing so, and just moving my team into a better position for the future. So now instead, out of nowhere, I'm looking at maybe selling, rather than Raya and Bradley, actually 8 Nuri and Darwin. So now, big reveal, you might have guessed it already, but if I move over to my team on Fantasy Football Hub, the transfers that I'm now maybe thinking of is keep Raya, keep Bradley, start them. And then, like I said, 8 Nuri now goes to Dan Burn, and Joao Pedro comes in for Darwin. I'm still a little bit hesitant on this one, but if I think Joao Pedro starts against Burnley, and he may get 1 start, probably not 2, but he might get 1.5 in Game Week 37, could be a decent option. So I would start Joao Pedro against Burnley this week, a nice cheeky differential. Burn would just be sat on my bench, and that would be my 2 transfers used. Now, stick with me whilst I fly through future weeks. 34, free hit, which means going into 35, I have 1 free transfer to use. Like I said, I like Burn because he's got a good fixture to partner up with my Udogie and my Gusto, who have the double game week. The bench now isn't really an option for a bench boost 35. So if I make those moves, I'm committing to bench boost 37, but I don't really mind that. I would probably hold on to Saka here. I know some people might look to move him on now. Spurs is not a bad game, by the way. I know I've got Udogie in my team, but I would now look at holding Saka. I can bench Raya for this week, and I don't need to use a transfer. I mean, that starting 11 is really, really strong. I don't think I'm that far behind. Wildcard is in 35, right? I think the team is looking pretty strong there. So, in 36, I would go into 36 with 3.5 million in the bank and 2 free transfers. Where I'm looking at this team and thinking it's not the strongest is it's not got the best defense for this week. And I think my attackers are okay, but they look better in 35. So I'm not expecting 36 to be a huge high-scoring week for me, but I would have 2 free transfers to use. I think I'm only going to use the 1 if it goes the way I plan, which would be Bradley out, right? Because I don't need Bradley. I'm hoping at this point I'd have 7.6 in the bank. I'm hoping Kieran Trippier offers himself as an option for me. If it's not him, it's probably going to be Fabian Schär that comes in for me this week. And it would be a double up on the Newcastle defence, but I don't mind that. So let me make the transfer. Trippier would then come in probably for Van Heck, right? And this would be the team. I'd have Saka and Raya against Bournemouth at home. Not many people will have Arsenal assets, especially not 2 of them. And then the rest of the players I'm pretty happy with. And I would roll the second transfer. That would mean going into 37, I would have 1 million in the bank. And this would be, and sorry, I'd have 2 free transfers, right? So going into double game 37, the 2 free transfers. I'm not necessarily that sure I need to make both. I think Trippier would be in the starting 11 for me. And I think, let's say, probably at the moment, Saka's on my bench. So I would need to sell Raya if I wanted the double game week keeper. So let's make that move. So Raya would become Onana here. Let's make that transfer. Then I would have 1 more transfer to use. I've got 2 options here. I either bench boost with Saka. You can see Salah's in my starting 11, by the way. So I only have 10 double game weekers starting there. Or I sell Saka at this point for someone like a Phil Foden. But then I obviously won't have Saka in 38. So this is the decision I'm going to have to face. Because no one's going to really be able to have Saka and Salah in 38 unless they keep them. So do I just bench boost with Saka against Man United? By the way, not a bad fixture to have him for. Potentially. I think I'll cross that bridge at the time. But let's say that I want to go full in on the doubles. Then maybe it would be Phil Foden comes in for me at that point. And it would be, if I make that transfer, it would be Foden coming in and then Salah drops to the bench. And that is the bench boost, as I showed you before, which is Onana, Burn, Salah, and Van Heck. It's pretty good. I'm so happy having Salah, by the way. I do not think you need 15 doublers. But I then do have an entire starting 11 of doublers. I've got 2 Spurs, 3 Chelsea. I've got 2 Newcastle in the starting 11. I've got Garnacho, Foden, and Haaland, and Joao Pedro. It's really, really not that bad. Obviously, if Joao Pedro is not starting at that point, he might prove an issue. And then in 38, if I optimise the team, I'd have Udogie in there, to be honest, probably ahead of Van Heck, and I would have, Kieran Trippier, and that would be the starting 11. I may even go for Onana, just to make sure I don't have double Chelsea defence. And then I would have 1 free transfer to use in the final game week of the season. I am really, really keen now on this idea of Burn and Joao Pedro, because I just think it suits me really well for the future, and I like a punt on Joao Pedro this week. But I am losing Darwin against Crystal Palace at home when we probably expect him to start. So I'd love to know what you think of that plan. I'm going to leave it there because that is an incredibly long video, but please let me know down below what you think. Do you like the Joao Pedro punt, or do you think I may be risking it? I should keep Darwin for 1 more week. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 33 Deadline Decisions video. Hopefully you did enjoy it. And if you did, please do smash that like button. Make sure to tune in to tomorrow's deadline stream as well. As always, I'll be live from 9 AM and hopefully we'll get some early Man City team news. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.